Well, for the past few weeks, we've been looking at a passage in a letter that was written by the Apostle Paul to a group of Christians living in Rome called the Book of Romans. And in Romans chapter 12, Paul lists 7 spiritual gifts that we've been calling the motivational gifts because they're really all about our internal motivations, our internal inclinations. We believe that every person who's a follower of Jesus, that they have been given by God a spiritual gift. And so this is the reason we've been looking at this particular list, because these gifts really shape to a large degree how we see the world around us. They shape how we hear things and how we respond to people. And ultimately, in some part, they shape even what we do. So this is a really big deal because we believe God has designed into everybody a sweet spot, or rather that lane that God has created us to run into. And these spiritual gifts help us find that lane that God created us to run into. So if you haven't been here, you can check out all the messages online. You can check them out by downloading our app on your mobile device. But today, we're going to talk about the gift of what Paul calls teaching. But when you think about the gift of teaching, a lot of times you think about standing in front of a classroom with kids or adults. And really, this is not the most accurate way to think about this particular gift. When you think about the gift of teaching, think about these words as well. Think about the scholar, think about the researcher, think about the instructor. Because all of these terms may be a bit more telling rather than just the generic idea of teaching or the teacher. You can think about the teacher, but also think about this person is a scholar, this person's a researcher, this person is an instructor. They love to explain things. This is the big thing about this particular person who has this gift. So just from the very beginning, like we've done every week, if teaching was your top score on your assessment, let's just see it. Let's see your hands. See your hands. Okay, a few of you. How about top 3? It was in your top 3. Okay, so quite a few of us are in that top 3 that are here this morning and in the first service as well. This is the snapshot of where we came in as a church on this. The gift of teaching was one of our strongest. It was tied for mercy. Serving was the biggest gift. Mercy and teaching came in at 3.3. So this is what you need to know is this is very abnormal. This is very not average for us as a church because typically you don't have a lot of teachers. So what this means is that we have an above average intelligent church, to which I've been telling you this forever. I've told you that the reason that you attend this church is because you are of above average intelligence. Now, not all of you are teachers, but you are smart enough to follow somebody smarter than you to hear. So thank you. But we are. This is incredible because we have a lot of capacity to think in our church, because when you think about this gift and you think about this person, they are a thinker. They process lots of information. This person loves gathering information. And they just are not content with gathering information. They're really not content until they are able to download that information into somebody else's life. They love to gather up information because they're a teacher, they're a scholar, they're a researcher, they're an explainer, they're an instructor. They love to get all of this information, but ultimately they're not content. Ultimately, the circle is not complete until this person is able to download information. Matter of fact, if you know one of these people in your life, inevitably, they will tell you much more about something than you want to know. Matter of fact, they will tell you more about something that you could give a flip about. And they don't care because they think it's important information and they are going to give it to you because that is their responsibility. And this is an incredible, incredible giftedness to the church because if the encourager is the mouth of the church, then the gift of teaching or the scholar or researcher, they are the mind of the church. They're thinkers, and they think deeply, and they're contemplative, and they think in a very complete manner. They think from different angles, and they think different ways about different things. These people are an incredible, incredible advantage to the church, and we have been graced with quite a few of you that this is your motivation. This is how God has wired you. This is the thumbprint of God on you. You may say, well, I don't feel like that. Well, remember, it's just not about an ability. It's about the capacity to develop an ability, okay? So when you think about this gift, I guess the best way to just give it to you so that you can understand it in light of all the other gifts that we've talked about. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're having a dinner party. dinner party at your house, and all the people who are represented at your house, they have at least one of the gifts that we've talked about so far. We've talked about all the other gifts, save mercy and giving, and we'll talk about those next week, okay? So everybody at your dinner party, some may be a prophet, some may have the gift of service, some may have the gift of encouragement, some may have the gift of administration. So everybody there that night is represented in at least one of those gifts. You decide that you want a little bit of an informal dinner party. You don't want to sit around the table that night. And so you invite everybody into the den. You want everybody to sit around the television. And you want everybody just to sit and talk. So you invite everybody over around the couches in front of the television, over there where your nice shag carpet is, or your shag carpet rug. And it's over there, and you just love that little place, and it's just so comfy, and it's just wonderful. And everybody brings their drink and they bring their plate over to where you have instructed everybody to come. But then there's that last person. That last person is just, they're caught up in the moment and they're talking a little bit and they're looking about where to sit. And all of a sudden they drop their drink and their food onto your shag rug carpet. Now, in that moment, everybody sees exactly what happens. But everybody sees it differently because they have been wired to see it differently. The food and the drink hits the carpet. The encourager says, "Oh, don't worry about it. Don't you dare feel bad about this. I've done this like 3 times before. Don't you feel bad? This is not a big deal." In this moment, the server has already scurried off to try to find something to clean it up with, but not before the administrator stands up with a spreadsheet that they had preemptively prepared for moments just like this. To say, well, the paper towels are over here and you should go there and you're going to need some club soda because this is not going to come out with club soda. And then the prophet sits back and looks at the person who's just dropped the glass in the plate and says, "If you'd been paying attention, you wouldn't have dropped it." Right? But then the teacher walks over to the person who's dropped the plate and says, "Do you know why this has happened?" See, you had your heavy items like your meat and stuff on the other side of the plate, and it caused it to be uneven. Next time, if you'll turn the plate around, and if you'll hold it just so that the weight, so you want to have the weight closest to your thumb. That way, if you get off balance, see how that works? Feel that. Put your hand right there. You feel the difference in that? To which the person who's just dropped the food doesn't care. But this person is going to lecture this person on the proper way to handle a plate. See, I watched a documentary one time, and they were talking about this very thing. So it's your thumb, and they'll just go and they'll just talk. That's the difference. Everybody sees the same incident, but everybody sees it differently, and everybody responds to it differently. So when you think about this person who loves to gather up information, they love to download information on folks, I want you to think of the gift of teaching as those who ultimately can take topics of complexity and communicate them with simplicity for the sake of clarity. This is what these people are able to do. This is why they are a gift to the church. They're able to take very complex theological ideas, complex social ideas, maybe even complex political ideas. And they're able to help us think about them through a theological lens. They're able to help us think about them in a way that we wouldn't think about them normally. These folks are able to take complexity and they're able to add simplicity to it so that everybody ultimately has clarity. Now, if when you think of a teacher, you think of some guy or some lady who gets up and opens up, a Bible or lectures or whatever, and they just drill on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And then at the end of it, the only thing that was it was deep. Like, right, you mean somebody looks at you and says, "Wow, that was deep." And you say, "Hey, what did they talk about?" It's like, "I don't know, but it was deep," right? It was just deep. If you don't know at the end of what this person has said, if you don't understand it clearly, they're not teaching. They don't have this gift. They're bloviating. They're just trying to make themselves sound overly intelligent. And really, if you're not able to take complex things and add a level of simplicity to it so that everybody can ultimately have clarity, then that's really not the expression of this gift. Because these people have an uncanny ability to take things that are extremely complicated, information that's extremely complicated, and they are able to cut it down to the bare irreducible minimum so that everybody can understand, oh, that's what it's about. That's what they meant by that. That's what that article was actually trying to say. Is that what that book was about? I read the book. I really didn't understand, but that makes perfect sense to me. This is this gift. It's the person who can take complexity, add simplicity to it, so ultimately everybody can have clarity. So let's talk a little bit about the characteristics. Again, there's exceptions to all of these, but by and large, when you know these people and you know that they have this gift, so many of these are going to ring so true with these folks. First of all, they tend to be avid readers. I mean, they just love to read. Now, I will also say that this is to gather information. They may also podcast. They may also listen to books. They may download portions of lectures. I mean, they may read articles. The point is, these people love information. They love information of all types. They love to learn. They love to learn so that ultimately they can help other people understand what they think that other people don't understand. And a lot of times, other people don't understand. But these folks love to read. They will read things that nobody else cares about. They would read things that no one else could have the discipline to even attempt to read. These folks, they just love information. If they have a free moment, they're going to figure out a way to gather in information. They're going to find a way to have time to read, time to podcast, time to listen to an episode of this or a documentary about that, because they are avid searchers of information. They tend to be introverted. Not always, but they tend to be introverted. Maybe like me, what I refer to myself these days as a functional introvert, right? I don't know exactly what that means, but it makes sense to me. And one day I may write a book about a day in the life of a functional introvert and see what that's like, because sometimes we get mixed up. We don't even know if we're extroverted or introverted. And if you think, hey, well, this doesn't really even sound like me, again, keep in mind, this may not be where you are today, but this is where God has given you the capacity to get to. So a lot of times these folks are introverted, and the reason they spend so much time gathering up information as an individual by themselves. They tend to be creative because they take all this information and they think about it in broad terms. They think about what is the implication of this information and how can I use this information for an advantage? Is there some usefulness to this information? Is there something that I can draw out of it? And so they will think about information in very creative ways so that this information can be translated into multiple contexts with maybe even multiple applications. They're extremely creative people. They tend to be genius prone. Now, not always, but these folks are absolutely gifted with intelligence. They have incredible retention skills. These folks, when they read something, it's in their head. Now, if a person who has this particular gift, they tell you, hey, I read something one time. I can't remember really where I read it, but this is what it said. You can almost always trust these people because these people have incredible intellects. They are very cerebral, and they're genius prone in the fact that they can remember so very much. It doesn't matter how far off in the distance this information was obtained. These folks, they have such incredible working minds because it is the thumbprint of God on their life. These folks love to certify truth. And what I mean by that is, these are not people who will believe something just because someone told them. These are people who are going to go find out if it's true or not. If you have ever Googled something in the middle of a sermon before the sermon was over to find out if something in said sermon was actually true or not, you may be one of these people. Because this is what these folks do. If you've ever been in a sermon and someone quoted a verse, but you knew they misquoted it, if you had to go find that verse to prove to yourself that they misquoted it, that you were right and they were wrong, you may have this gift. Now, this is not a bad thing. Again, this is a gift to the church. They love to certify truth. They just don't take things just because someone says it. They will actually go and find out for themselves. These folks are analytical. They're extremely analytical. They're linear thinkers. They're logical. They're rational because they are fact-driven. They're not feeling-driven. They have feelings. But when it comes to making decisions, they would rather make a decision based on information rather than feelings any day. They have feelings, but they're not feeling-driven. They're actually fact-driven. Again, another gift. They love charts. They love lists. They love all this stuff because it helps take information and it helps to simplify it and it helps to bring clarity to whatever they're talking about. A lot of times this person likes it quiet. If you've ever heard someone say, "Could you be quiet? I'm trying to think." It may be from one of these folks because they like to think about things in a much more concentrated way than a lot of us like to think about things. They will think about something from the beginning to the end. And they will hypothesize along the way what may happen at this point, and what if they say this, and well, what if that happens, and that could spiral into a series of events that if this happens, then we need to have a plan for that. But the alternative is, and they have to have a little bit of quiet to think about these things because they are reflective and they're very deep thinkers. They value accuracy. They want things to be right. They hate misinformation. They do not like misinformation at all. If someone gives them wrong information and they find out that it's wrong, this is deeply troubling to these people because they value accuracy. If they tell you a story, they want to tell it accurately. They're not big embellishers. They don't want to exaggerate things. They want to tell it just the way it is. And if they hear somebody else telling the story that they know about and they think it's a little bit too embellished or too much of an exaggeration, it bothers them because they value accuracy. These people have lots of questions. Now, this really is what I think is one of the greatest aspects to this particular gift because this person is always questioning almost everything. And they're questioning why. Well, why? But why? But why? Maybe you have one of those kids at home that kind of has this natural inclination. Maybe you're married to one of these people. Maybe you work for one of these folks. But it's always why. They just don't want to know what, but they want to know why. But why? Well, tell me why. But tell me why. And for some of us, we get extremely frustrated by that. It's like, what? I told you. Why? And they're like, I don't care about the why. I want to know why. They're always questioning. Remember, they are the mind. They're always thinking. They're always reasoning. They're always trying to figure out a way to take this information that sometimes is complicated, simplify it, and give clarity to everybody. And they have all kinds of questions. They help us wrestle with questions because oftentimes they get us thinking about these questions because they were the first ones to ask. And then we're like, oh, I never thought about that. Now I can't stop thinking about that. I can't get that out of my head. What's the answer? And so they always have questions. They're very interested in qualifications. These are folks that if someone's up lecturing them or giving a sermon, they want to know, who are you? Did anybody tell you could be up there? Did anybody teach you about how to be up there? Do you have any qualifications? Do you have education? Do you have a degree? Did somebody, pray over you? Did they put hands on you? Did they put oil on you? Did anything at all happen which makes you legitimate? Are you legitimate? Right? They want to know what the qualifications, because if you're not an expert and if you are not legit, then I'm not going to waste my time and sit and listen to you because I'm not going to believe anything you're going to say anyway because I don't think you're qualified. This is how this person thinks. They're very technical. They're very interested in data of all forms. And they want their data to be technical, and they're very methodical. They're very methodical in how they go about obtaining data, storing it, filing it away, being able to retrieve it. These folks are a blessing to the church, and these are some of the positive characteristics. But just like we talked about with all these other gifts, there's uses, and there's also misuses of this gift. Here's some of the potential dangers for the teacher. They're harsh towards those who disagree with them. Now, the reason you need to understand why they can get harsh with those who disagree with them, because these folks with this giftedness of research and knowledge and scholarship, they're always convinced they're right. Because they're thinking, I've read more about this than you. I went to school longer about this than you. I've been doing this longer than you. And so they can get a little harsh with people that disagree with them because they think, and they can think, and this can be a negative, they just think they know better because they have been getting all this information, and this can lead to pride because, Paul talked about knowledge can puff up, and because, you think you know more than somebody else, you think you're better than somebody else, and just because you know more, you think you're smarter than. And so this can be a bad thing for these folks because they gather in so much information, they begin to look at everybody else like dilettantes, and it's like, who are you? Like, you ever read a book before? And all this, and it's like, do you even know about this? And so this is a big deal for them. It can lead to pride. They can become a critic of other people. They just criticize because, again, they're always taking an elevated position. And it's not necessarily that they're critiquing about the information. The information may be correct, but they may be critiquing on technical flaws, on approach and presentation. And so this can be the negative side. This person can drift into becoming just a very critical person. They're a perfectionist. Again, they value accuracy, but to the point where it may begin to stress other people out, and it may begin to cause relational tension. They can overcorrect people. maybe even people they don't know. They can walk up and say, hey, I heard you talking to so-and-so a minute ago, but that wasn't right. It's like, excuse me, what's your name? Or they just overcorrect. And sometimes correction's good, but correction always happens best in the context of a relationship. It always happens best in the context of a relationship. And sometimes this particular person, because again, this is a positive that can go negative. They value accuracy. Accuracy is an important thing. Truthfulness, an important thing. And they want things to be truthful and they want things to be accurate. They want things to be right. This is how God wired them. But sometimes they can step outside their box, even their box of responsibility. They can step outside of their lane and they can begin to actually cause more tension than good because they can overcorrect. This person sometimes when they're not using their gift correctly, they can prefer an audience to a relationship. They don't want to be in a relationship with people. They just want people to listen. They just want an audience. They just want someone to hear them. They don't actually really care on a personal level or an individual level. They just want people to come listen. And so this is when the gift gets misused. Sometimes they can misinterpret people because they think they know so much and their information causes them to look at people differently and they can just misinterpret why someone said this and why someone didn't say that. They can be impatient with mistakes, again, because of some of the reasons we talked about. Sometimes this person, when they're talking, can be seen as boring because they tell you way more than you want to know about certain subjects. They'll be talking about the Christmas story and they'll talk about Jesus laid in the manger and then they'll say, hey, did you know that the manger was made with this particular type of wood and this particular type of wood was found around the Dead Sea and they would bring this wood in from the Dead Sea. Men would go out on these boats and then they would bring it in and they would fasten it together and they would use this tar and this tar was, it's actually reminiscent back to Alexandria when they would use, remember Moses, when Moses was put into the ark and they would use that tar and you're like, dude, it's Jesus in a manger, I'm with you. I don't care about the rest. And so sometimes they can get a little boring and tell you about things you have no interest in. And they oftentimes can be suspicious first. They don't trust, they'll just be suspicious. They don't, if one of these folks are your friends, if you tell one of your friends who have this gift about something that you did Friday night and it doesn't sound true, let me tell you what this person thinks. They think you're a liar. They don't believe you. They may smile at you. They may wink at you, but they're thinking, liar. Now, you've got some friends, you tell them that big story about Friday night, and they're like, that's awesome. That's great. Call me next time. And the teacher guy's over there like, you're all idiots. Anybody who believes this is an idiot. So this is kind of how this gift works. But I don't know how you process things, but it always helps, I think, to be able to see these people in the scripture. And when we think about this gift of this teacher, this researcher, that helps us think about things, that helps us think about not only what we believe, but the teacher helps us think about why we believe what we believe. Because they're always questioning why. And some of you walked away from the church, you walked away from faith because this is how God wired you. God wired you to ask why. And you listened to a sermon one time and it was kind of hard to believe. And somebody told you this is what you need to believe. But the only thing that kept springing up in your heart was why. The only thing that kept bouncing around in your head was why. And then when you ask your why question, the church was very uncomfortable with it. And the church wouldn't address it. And you thought something was wrong with you. You thought there was something wrong with questioning. You thought there was something wrong with your why. You thought you should have just said, yes, I'll believe the what. But there was something in you that wouldn't believe the what without also attempting to investigate the why. And you left thinking that you were broke, that something was wrong with you, because the church, in some circles, we've had a very harsh relationship with the question why. We're kind of intimidated by it. Listen, it is important what we believe. It is also important to know why we believe what we believe. And some are more inclined to want to know the why. Some of us will believe the what just because someone we love and trust tells us. But there are some among us that's not so. You want to know the why. And so you left thinking that something was wrong. One thing that the church really depends on in this giftedness of the researcher, the scholar, the explainer, the instructor, the teacher, these are the people who help us answer the why questions. These are the people who help us think deeply about theological things, help us think deeply about social things. These are the folks that help us answer very difficult questions because they are so very informed, and God has gifted them in such a way to be able to think on such a level that some of us can't. And that's not to mean that there's something faulty with the rest of us. It just means that God has gifted some of us in different ways. And this gift is so strategic because it just not only underlines the importance of what we believe, but it also underlines the importance of knowing why we believe what we believe. One of these folks that we see in the scripture is Thomas the disciple. Thomas, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, one of the first followers of Jesus, hung out with Peter and James and John and Nathaniel, hung out with all of those guys. A guy who spent about 3.5 or so years with Jesus, listening to Jesus teach, hanging out with the other guys. Of course, Judas, he goes south, he betrays Jesus. Jesus goes into Jerusalem, and Jesus is crucified by the Romans and the religious establishment. He's buried. 3 days later, he's raised from the dead, and Jesus appears to Peter, and Jesus appears to John, and Jesus appears to some of the disciples. And then we're told about Thomas, and Thomas, he's one of these folks that he's a question ask. He's a questioner. He's one of these folks who he's just not going to believe because somebody tells him. He wants to investigate. He's got more questions than just what. He's got a why. And so after the resurrection, these guys that he loved and trusted, these guys that he had spent about 3 or so years with, they came to Thomas and said, Thomas, we have seen the Lord. He's not dead. He's risen. But Thomas said to them, listen, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. Now, if we'd been one of his friends, we would have been offended. Why don't you believe me? You think I'm lying to you? You think I'd lie to you about that? You think we're crazy? And what do we call Thomas? We call him Doubting Thomas. Maybe it's a little bit of a bad rap. Maybe we've mislabeled Thomas. Why don't we just call him Asking Thomas, or Questioning Thomas, or Not Gullible Thomas? Why is it a great thing for him to believe something just because someone told him, and why is it a bad thing for him to want validation? Why is it wrong for him to want confirmation? Why is it wrong for him to want proof? Why is it wrong for him to want an intellectual reason to believe in the resurrection? Why is that wrong? Could it be that maybe this is just how God wired his brain to work? They've told him what to believe. He's risen. But he wants to know why. Why? Why do you believe this? Why should I believe this? I want proof. I want to be able to touch him. I want to be able to run my finger in the very wounds if necessary. And what did Jesus allow Thomas to have? Proof. He allowed his questions to get answered. Jesus is never intimidated by our questions. I don't know why the church is so intimidated by questions of why. Jesus was never intimidated by questions of why. Jesus didn't even seem to be greatly offended by Thomas and what he said. Thomas ultimately believed because he understood there was a reason why he should believe. He saw, he touched, and ultimately Thomas would leave Jerusalem. He would leave Samaria and go into the uttermost parts of the world, and many believe that he went as far as India. And there he preached the gospel to that nation where he became a martyr. Not for what he believed that someone told him, but he died as a martyr because of what he saw and what he touched. And there's a big difference in that. He asked why. And maybe that's just how your mind works. He wanted to know, why should I believe this? And Jesus gave him the reason why he should. Then in the scriptures, we find a group of believers in Berea, not the one up the interstate, but the one just a little bit from Jerusalem. I'm sure there's some believers in Berea that think like this as well. There's some thinkers right here in this room. But in the New Testament, we find that as the church is growing, that in this city of Berea, there was a group of Christians that Paul came to. And Paul, the Apostle Paul, who was persecutor of the church, turned missionary. This incredible thinker, this scholar of his own right. Paul is preaching to these folks. And this is what it says. It says, now the Berean Jews were more noble character than those in Thessalonica, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. Now, should Paul have been offended? Should Paul have thought, what's wrong with you people? This is just how some of them thought. They wanted to validate. This is some of you who Google in the midst of the message and say, I don't know about that. I don't think that verse is in there. This is how they thought. And they would go home and they would open up the scriptures and they would find out if what Paul was telling them was true. This didn't make them bad and this didn't make Paul untrustworthy. This was just how they thought. This was how God wired them to think. They were just not content with, this is what you should believe. They wanted to know why we should believe it. Then, in the New Testament, early church, we find a guy by the name of Apollos. Apollos was this incredible communicator. Apollos was this incredible intellectual scholar who was this passionate, persuasive communicator that we're introduced to in the book of Acts. And this is what it says about Apollos. It says, meanwhile, a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, a scholarship community in and of itself, he came to Ephesus and he was a learned man, right? With a thorough knowledge of the scriptures. Now, what's about to happen to Apollos is he's about to meet another couple of people who have this gift of the teacher, researcher, explainer. It says, he had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervor. He was passionate, and he taught about Jesus accurately, though he only knew the baptism of John. Evidently, Apollos, he had mostly great theology, but there was a couple of things that he hadn't been able to complete the circle. He hadn't been able to dot every I just quite yet. So he began to speak boldly in the synagogue when Priscilla and Aquila heard him. This is wonderful. I love this. This is why you should read the New Testament, because it is just so real life. They invited him to their home and explained to him the way of God more adequately. Here's Priscilla and Aquila sitting in church listening to Apollos, and they're elbowing each other. He got that wrong. That's not right. And so they go up in the most diplomatic of ways after church and say, Apollos, we'd love to have you in our home for a meal. Now, what they didn't say was, we want to have you over for dinner so we can correct you. Right? They didn't say that. But they said, hey, we want to have you over. We want to get to know you. And there they explained to him more adequately. Now, let me tell you, some of us aren't man enough to handle that. Some of us aren't woman enough to handle that. Some of us are still too childish to handle that. Some of us want to wear into adulthood our little boy britches and our little girl britches. And when somebody tries to explain something to us more adequately, God, audacity. Who do they think they are? Let me tell you, if some of us had been Apollos, we would have quit that day. We would have took our ball and went home. Because somebody told us we weren't completely right. But here's what I love about when Christians get Christianity right. Apollos listened, and Apollos learned from the correction of someone who understood something better than him. And when Apollos wanted to go to Achaia, because he didn't quit, the brothers and sisters encouraged him and wrote to the disciples there to welcome him. And when he arrived, he was a great, what? Talk to me. Help. You know why he was able to help somebody else? Because he was willing to let someone else help him. And the reason some of us will never be able to help others like we could, we are unwilling to let other people help us because we're too insecure. We have a complex of some sort. We don't want feedback. We don't want to be told that we didn't think about it accurately. We don't want to be told our thought was incomplete. We don't want to be told that there's something we don't know. But he became a great help because he let somebody else be a help to him. And it says, for he vigorously refuted his Jewish opponents in public debate, proving from the scriptures that Jesus was the Messiah. All because he was willing to be taught. And because he was a scholar, he was able to take the Old Testament scriptures and he was able to not only tell people what they should believe, but he was able to tell them why they should believe it. Brothers and sisters, Do you remember in Isaiah 53 where he says he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities? All of that happened to the Messiah in Isaiah 53. Ladies and gentlemen, Isaiah 53, that's Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Jewish brothers and sisters, do you remember in Genesis 22 when Abraham took Isaac upon the mount and he said, Isaac, don't flip out. God is going to provide himself a sacrifice. God will provide a lamb. And then as Abraham was about to run the knife through Isaac, he looked up and there was a ram caught in the thicket. Ladies and gentlemen, God did keep the promise to provide that lamb. His name was Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Jewish brothers and sisters, do you remember when Micah the prophet said in Micah 5:2 that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem? That was Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And he was able to take the scriptures and not only say this is what you should believe, but he was able to say this is why you should believe it. These are great defenders of the faith. These are the people that we want talking to people who have big questions. It's okay for people to have big questions, but we need these people to help us answer the big questions. And then finally, there's Dr. Luke. A lot of people say that Paul wrote the majority of the New Testament. It's not true. He wrote the majority of the books in the New Testament. However, Luke wrote the majority of the content in the New Testament. He wrote the gospel according to Luke, and he wrote the Acts of the Apostles. And those two books together, that makes up the majority of the content for the New Testament. Luke thought this way. He was the teacher. He was the researcher. He was a medical doctor. He was linear. He was logical. He's rational. He's all of these things. And we see it from the very prologue of how he begins his gospel. And this is what he says. He says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who were the first eyewitnesses and servants of the word. So he's writing a letter. And he's wanting the people that's on the other end of the letter to know, I'm going to tell you what you should believe, but I'm going to tell you why you should believe it. I know that Matthew's written his gospel. I know that Mark talked to Peter. Mark has pinned down a gospel. But I really think that I need to add to this because I'm a follower of the first followers. That's what Luke was. He was a follower of the first followers. It's believed Luke, as he was a companion of Paul, that he circled back around. Luke circled back to Jerusalem, and it is believed that Luke went to the people involved in the Jesus story, and he sat down and he interviewed them. It is believed that Luke went back to Jerusalem and sat down with Mary and said, Mary, I'm a doctor. Let's talk about this virgin birth thing. Tell me how that worked. I know what happened, but I need to know why I should believe it. It's believed that Luke went back to Jerusalem and he talked to some of the 500 that we know saw Jesus after the resurrection, 500 eyewitnesses. And it's believed that he went back, right? Went back and knocked on some of the doors. Yes. Are you one of those I've heard that seen Jesus, that saw Jesus after the resurrection? Yes, I am. Would you mind if I come in and talk to you? I want to ask you a few questions about that. This is what Luke did. He says, with this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I just didn't believe it because they told me to believe it, but I have investigated this thing. I too decided to write an orderly account, logical, sequential, chronological. That's the reason he starts at the birth of Jesus in the days of Caesar Augustus when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. It's almost like Luke was saying, I dare you to check it out. I dare you to check it out. I'm going to tell you when it happened because I'm trying to tell you why you should believe that it happened. I want to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that purpose you may know the certainty, just not why, just not what, but why, that you may know the certainty of the things that you have been taught. And he gives us the story of Jesus to say this is what you should believe. But then he says this is why you should believe it. And then he gives us the post-resurrection account of the apostles in the Acts of the Apostles. And in chapter 1 he says, and Jesus appeared with so many proofs of the fact that he did rise from the dead. So we learn lots of things from this gift. One, truth is liberating. These people believe that truth is liberating. That's the reason they're so concerned about accuracy. They're so passionate about getting right because they believe that the truth has the power to set one free. we can also need to be reminded in this whole discussion that information, true information plus application is the only thing that leads to transformation. There's no need to talk about it's all equally inspired, but not all equally applicable. That it's only information, true information plus the application that leads to transformation. That's how life change happens in life. You take information, you apply it, boom, that's transformation. But the thing that just resonates for all of us, I think, with this giftedness is the fact that why you believe what you believe has the power to keep you believing. That's why this gift is so important. Because sometimes what we believe is difficult to believe. Sometimes what we believe seems illogical to believe. Sometimes what we believe seems nonsensical to believe. But the reason that God has gifted these particular people in the church is they not only remind us about what we believe, but they remind us why we should believe it. Because Luke tells his story about the virgin-born Christ child in Bethlehem, baptized by John the Baptist, preaching from town to town, healing the blind, raising the dead, betrayed by a friend, crucified by the Romans and the religious establishment, buried in a tomb, only to be raised from the dead, to appear to his disciples, to ascend into heaven. And those disciples who were so afraid before the resurrection were the disciples that took the story of Jesus to the Roman Empire, and they paid with their very own blood. And Luke is essentially saying, this is why you should believe it. Because the first generation of Jesus followers who saw it, the only generation who would have really known whether it was true or not, were the generation that willingly laid down their life and allowed their families and friends to lay down their lives, not because of what they believed, but because of what they saw. That's why this gift is a gift to the church, because our why we believe sometimes is the fuel that keeps us believing when what we believe is difficult to believe. Let me pray for us. Father, speak to our hearts. Thank you for this gift and what it means in the church. Thank you for those who have questions that you have given folks in the church who they can address those questions. They write about those questions. They speak about those questions. God, I pray that we'll always, no matter what our giftedness is, that we'll lean into what we believe, but also we'll lean into why we believe what we believe, because why we believe what we believe is the thing that sometimes keeps us believing. Thank you for those through the ages of church history, for those in the New Testament, and those among us who do so much of our thinking for us. We're grateful for them. In Jesus' name.